2016 that occurred in Cliff Creek was unique, and it really only consumed Forest Service property. It did not. It did consume a little bit of private, but an insignificant amount in regards to the resource concerns associated with it. And then in 2018, looking at the Roosevelt fire, primarily consumed property, Forest Service property, but in that private land there on the eastern side of the fire was a large rural subdivision, and it consumed 51 structures in that subdivision and moved and basically burned through the entirety of that subdivision, as well as some ranch, large tract private property as well. So digging in a little closer, you can see in 2012 it was a start to the partnership. So the Fontenelle fire, some groups have been working on some earlier fires, but the Fontenelle fire really drew everybody together, all the partners that I'll get to here in a second. It was 47,000 acres roughly, and the partnership and all the partners involved were able to raise $850,000 to work towards restoration and recovery efforts associated with that catastrophic fire. So the timeline: the fire started in June of 2012, and for those that are familiar with the fire regime in Wyoming, more specifically the Western Wyoming, but Wyoming in general, June is very early for fires to occur within the forested ecosystem. You know, typically our fire regime in Sublette County, as well as other higher elevation parts of Wyoming, you know, you're looking at maybe the end of August, September, being when most of those fires tend to take off. So this was really early for a fire to occur in Sublette County. So the partners started to engage as the flames died. You know, we started meeting with partners and landowners on the ground, trying to determine how we were going to deal with this large landscape event. We started grant writing in the fall and winter of 2012, trying to capture funds and able to help us enact BMPs and help with grazing deferments and that the federal agencies were mandating, as well as deferment to private property to help with recovery of those areas. So the following 2 summers, which for those that are familiar with agency protocols, they want up to 2 years growing season rest in a result of a fire. So we implemented very aggressive weed treatment because we knew we already had populations of weeds prior to the fire, and this disturbance was going to give them the increased, or the ability to increase their foot and their stronghold within the landscape. We looked at hiring riders on pastures and allotments. There was 11 allotments consumed in this fire, or parts of, and so we were able to hire riders to help with, if the pasture or the allotment wasn't burned in its entirety, that we could use herding through additional riders to ensure that rest. We also offered offsite grazing. So we found private property, vacant allotments that were available to livestock producers, both private, on private ground, affected, as well as grazing allotments, to find that offsite grazing and the money to truck to that area, as well as to help pay for the difference in cost if they had to go to private property from, say, a forest allotment. The next key thing is all the fence reconstruction. You know, we had allotment boundary fences, forest to BLM property fences, forest to private, that all needed to be reconstructed. And so we were able to fundraise funding to rebuild those fences, and at the same time convert them to wildlife friendly. The other thing we did was we set goals and objectives for recovery as an interagency and landowner engagement, to make sure that we could passed the red phase test that we had enough recovery to reauthorize or graze on those lands. Then after those first 2 key critical years, we continued to do monitoring and weed treatments through 2018 till our funding basically got used up. We're still continuing monitoring on those permanent transects associated with the grazing allotments. Some of our more temporary aspen regeneration transects and stuff are not going to be as revisited on an annual or every decade basis. So here's some pictures to show you what it looked like. This is Indian Creek. It's a riparian area that was consumed by the fire. So this is July. So after the fire moved through this area in 2012. And then you can see here in 2014, the willowed regeneration and the herbaceous regeneration that came through this was actually really significant compared to, you know, the drought that we seen in 2012. Although we did have a really good snowpack year in 2013 that by all means helped 2013 and 14's recovery of that site. So here's the partnership that started with that. You know, we've obviously had the agencies that were involved. NRCS helped with private landowner assistance. Same with Game and Fish, county commissioners, the district, weed and pest, and the landowners. The landowners put in a lot of labor. They put in time. They had to deal with, you know, the issues of instead of turning out your back door into your allotments, you had to truck and then obviously caretake your cattle potentially 30, 40 miles away, which was an increased cost compared to, you know, riding your horse out your back door or trailering a short distance. So moving on to Cliff Creek, it was a smaller fire, 34,000 acres. The biggest goal was built for this group was building on experience and reflecting what we learned at the Fontenelle fire. And due to its its ownership patterns, the need, it only burned primarily one grazing allotment. So the need to fundraise was a little smaller. So we only raised about $67,000. So you can see the fire was in July, a little later than normal. It was started by lightning. Then the same day this fire started, the conversations between the partners involved and the funding entities started almost immediately, which was different than the last fire. We're getting a little better responding and adapting quicker to those events. We started having meetings that fall and winter with partners and permittees, being there wasn't a huge private landowner component. We focused just on the permittees that were affected to look at how we could help them with dealing with this incident for the coming years. So the summer of 17 and 18, you can see right here in this picture, we constructed a drift fence along the base of this ridge that basically allowed the permittees to graze a majority of one of their main pastures in this allotment without having to rest it. So we were able to move livestock around and not necessarily have to go off-site with any grazing. So they were able to maintain that continuity. And we were in partnership able to construct this high tensile fence to ensure that rest that was needed. The weed treatments, we obviously knew there were some existing populations, and so we got some money to work on that. The other thing we did, which was unique compared to Fontenelle, was we hired a rider at the district, an employee that would go out there, check this drift fence, make sure that they didn't get around the end of the drift fence, or if wildlife had any interaction with it, it broke, or grounding issues. that we had them do that. We also hired somebody with the skill set to do weed surveys throughout the burned area. So to explore areas that we might not know if there were not have known if there was a weed issue, so we could do surveys to better help weed and pest identify and treat those before they became a major problem. So you can see here above Cliff Creek in 17, you've got some recovery, but you see we've got some major interspace issues within the timber that are still bare ground, essentially. And so year 2, you can see it was a pretty mosaic burn through the brush, as you can tell there, but we've got good herbaceous recovery on that outside of the timber stands. And then in the timber stands, you can see we have quite a bit of herbaceous coming in, and you can see all those gold leaves are all aspen regeneration. This had a lot of suppressed aspen stands within this area that by burning out or by having the fire consume the mixed conifer stands had a huge release on the aspen communities, which this area, for those that aren't familiar with it, is summer range to a lot of the red desert to Hoback migration corridor mule deer. So the aspen community regeneration is going to have large benefits to the wildlife community in this burn. So you can see here the picture got the page got less busy. We didn't have any landowners. We had permittee involvement. We had the primary agency that's in charge of managing those lands, and then we had weed and pest and game and fish and ourselves that worked cooperatively to ensure those projects were a success and that livestock in those allotments could return after the needed rest set forth by the agency. So we'll move forward to 2018. Largest fire to date that this group's dealt with, 61,500 acres. We were awarded little over $1.6 million. And the goal here was third time's the charm. You know, we're since 2012 have learned upon each incident and how we're gonna partner and react to those events. You can see here in the picture on the upper right, the team is meeting in fire camp while the fire's still burning and starting to talk about how we're going to work with all the different nuances to this event, and meeting with fire management to be able to get an understanding of what's going on and the resource issues. So this one was unique to the other two, is we actually had a lot of private property loss because of that rural subdivision that was burned through. So like I said, we had lost 55 structures. Road infrastructure to the subdivision was impacted greatly. And we added new partners to the team due to some of this large private land involvement. There was also a need realized by the group that we needed to have outreach and workshops because of all these small landowners or small property ownership that was in here, to where we just couldn't do the individual outreach and get it done in a timely manner. So we wanted to hold workshops and outreach to make sure that questions were getting answered and people knew that what resources were available to do that. So we did that a couple different ways. You can see here in the picture, this was at the Bondurant Elementary School in the gymnasium. We had community meetings. The fire at this time was not even declared out. They had lifted the evacuation restrictions to the subdivision at this point, but we were meeting with these individuals, had booths and tables full of information in order to answer questions and give those, help those landowners through the healing process of being affected by a wildfire. The one other thing we did was individual assessments. So if you attended these meetings or contacted the district or any of the team members, we would look at soils maps, look at the burn severity map that was produced for this fire, and look at issues of, you know, erosion potential, slumping potential, revegetation is, you know, that might go along with it. And we would provide best management practices to help that individual landowner on that. And that team consisted of the Game and Fish, the district, NRCS, and Weed and Pest to get this done. And then we were able to meet with individuals to give them a packet of information in order for them to have a more individual assessment of their property. Then the 1 year past the fire in the fall, we had a open house in a parking lot in that subdivision. And it was for not only that subdivision, but everybody in the Bondurant Basin to come to bring us questions. Now that it's been a year, do you have a question about a plant, if it was an invasive or a noxious, or what, you know, recovery of an area? A lot of people brought us pictures on cell phones. There was a few follow-ups after that fact that maybe we needed to go on site and take a look, and so we did that. The timeline here, this was a later fire for us, September 2018. You know, it was starting, fall had set in, very cold temperatures, phone calls and conversations with the partners and certain landowners that we knew were affected started that very first day. So you see the progression of the group getting more proactive than reactive to these events. This was really cool. We were able the funding lined up really easy, and we're able to have the majority, 99% of our funding was in place the fall after the fire occurred. So we were able to go right into the winter planning with money in hand to look at practices and implementing recovery and stuff on the land. So in the summer of 19, you know, we started monitoring erosion. We set up erosion monitoring sites, vegetation recovery sites. We worked with grazing deferment on several of the allotments, and that we were able to do a couple different ways with keeping cattle in their allotment, but deferring pastures. And we also had to move or do some grazing deferment and moving cattle to some vacant allotments in the neighboring area. We did start a very aggressive weed treatment, not only in the subdivision, but on public land as well. And then we were able to get an NRCS grant to work on erosion control and stabilization of the road infrastructure for ingress, egress, and life safety in that subdivision. And we were able to start work on that in 2019 with stabilization and erosion control to ensure that road network did not fail due to effects of the fire. And then in 2020, we added to our plan. We met and we added additional riders to the deferred, to all the allotments affected, because there was a need to do that based on, especially in the vacant allotment. It bordered some retired sheep allotments that were now a forage reserve that had next to no fences between them, and we had issues with cattle drifting away from their authorized area of use because they didn't know where they were and they were trying to go towards home. So the district hired those as contract. We did that as a contract to facilitate that, and it worked very, very smooth for us. We had 2 riders that worked that effort. So you can see here, year 1, we had pretty good, regeneration within this forested stand. You can still see a lot of interspace where the red needle cast is covering up bare ground, but you can see some forbs and herbaceous vegetation starting to come back in. And then this is year 2 on this, and you can see we've really closed in those interspaces and have reached, you know, objectives for ground cover that were set forth. The uniqueness to this fire is it did consume right down to the river's edge. This is the upper Hoback River. This is one of the sites that was a monitoring site for that grazing allotment. So we went and retook pictures. This is the fall of the year the fire occurred. You can see it consumed the vegetation right down to the river's edge. And then the willow regeneration the following year was phenomenal. Trying to get down to take this picture, there was several head over tea kettle events trying to get down through the willows and other shrubs that started popping up just because you couldn't see where you were stepping, and you were stepping in holes or getting your feet caught. So we had good recovery there. And obviously this was the largest participation of partnerships due to the complexity of this fire. You know, we added our emergency management, our unified fire to this to help with the private lands and post-fire recovery on those private parcels. We brought in Extension to show us, you know, to help us with some of the publications that they have. And again, the landowners that committed time and dealing with their property and management of their property and grazing permits was rather large. You know, this is something that it can't be done without a whole bunch of partnerships, not only the ones that are doing this implementation on the ground, but the people that are writing the checks that we're applying to these grants for. You know, there's everything from state government to federal government to private companies and non-governmental organizations that we've reached out to and tapped to help, you know, our community and our county recover after these events. And the groups, you know, the thing that we do, you know, is looking into the future. What are we going to do the next time a wildfire, a flood event, some natural disaster moves through to help with our natural resources? You know, and we've looked at, do we want to add a water quality component now that we've seen some larger water bodies potentially be affected? You know, increase and continue to educate and reach out on fuels reductions to those private property landowners to help with you know, the dealing with a fire that maybe will or could pass through your property, and continue to learn from the past is key. And we've also, during this time, have set up a forest collaborative to work on forest health throughout the county, regardless of ownership. And we've been pretty successful in implementing projects to work on a healthy forest and a resilient forest, which in turn can, fire is a part of that, but hopefully is not catastrophic and leads to property loss and damage on the landscape that is potentially irreversible. So the take home here, I think the way Sublette County handled it was, you know, when there was a fire, we said, how can we help? Not how are you going to fix it? You know, so we didn't leave private landowners on an island by themselves to deal with this. Forest Service, BLM, state lands, whoever, you know, everybody said, how can we help? And let's eat this animal one bite at a time, but as a group, and we can be efficient with that. Looking at funding from sources outside of the box. You know, we've gotten pretty creative. You can see on that list on a couple slides previous that we've been really good at thinking outside the box to make sure we can keep tapping new resources and not keep going back to the same ones. And planning is a good one. We are always meeting during these efforts after, you know, in the winter, looking into year 2 or 4 or whatever the number looks like, to make sure that we're in constant communication. And that goes to the next one about the coordinating meetings after every season. That's something we learned over time from the Fontenelle to Cliff Creek and Cliff Creek to Roosevelt, is reaching back to those landowners, those agencies. You know, how can we learn? What can we do to modify it to make it better for the next year? You know, and finally, there's no I in team. This whole group puts all efforts in, and so it's a big team effort. It's not one person taking all the credit to that. And relationships do matter, and that's what we in Sublette County have done. We, you know, the private landowner relationships to the professional relationships between agencies is key, and that's something that you know, may not be in place, and it wasn't in place in Sublette County forever. It's something that's really matured since 2012, and it's helped us on a whole list of things, from cheatgrass projects, not just fire projects, whole countywide efforts in order to make it done success. So I'm going to show you a resource that we put together, hopefully, if it works. All righty, it's working. So this is a resource we put together for landowners as a partnership to host on our district's website. And so as a result of the Roosevelt fire, so you can see we've got the bear map, burn severity index. We've got, you can click on these to understand burn severity, vegetative response to fires that was put together by our partnerships. Here's some weed and pest information. So you got weeds and revegetation, a landowner form, so weed and pest can treat on your land. Companies that'll come in and help do tree removal, hazardous tree removal. We also set up a specific seedling tree sales for landowners and species to plant there. So I'd encourage you to go to this. Here's some publications put forth by UW and others that we've looked at. So I'd encourage you to take time and go through that. This is being recorded, so you'll be able to go to this link after this presentation, and feel free to get with me or Jess, and if you want to put this on your website, or if you want hard copies of this information, we do still have some of that available. This is the team, and for what it looks like right now, you know, it might look different the next time we have a natural disaster within Sublette County. You know, we're going to add to it. We're going to engage members as deemed appropriate. So that's kind of the end of the presentation that I have. I just wanted to highlight the other 3 webinars that we are going to do in this virtual world for the upcoming months. So feel free to RSVP similar to you did to this one with Jess, so you can get the invite and the meeting link to those 3 exciting webinars that we're trying to put together for you guys. So with that, I will open it up to any questions, if anybody has any questions.
So yeah, feel free to unmute and ask any questions you guys have for this last little bit.
Hi, Mike. This is Danelle Peck. I'm with the USDA Northern Plains Climate Hub based in Laramie, Wyoming. And we had a fire, the Mullen Fire, recently down here in my corner of the state. And it got me thinking about how much of the relationship building and the conversations and the planning, how much of that could happen before fire strikes an area? Or is it really more efficient to wait until your area is hit with a fire, because it is pretty random, to pull a group together like this?
Yeah, so I will say I would encourage, and I know it's already happening. I've already shipped all kinds of information to Saratoga and Cameron Rollins Conservation District and Joe Parsons down there. I mean, I've even went so far as to give him our applications to these funding agencies so he can plagiarize as seen fit to help those landowners and communities that were affected down there. So, and I know they already, I'm not as familiar with the Laramie River side or the Laramie side of it, but Saratoga has a huge cooperative effort ongoing with the Encampment River restoration, the Platte River Mule Deer Initiative. So they already have those players kind of in place, and they're going to be able to take a lot of those players and put them into play on this fire recovery. And I believe they're already making big headway in fence construction to mitigate livestock impacts. The Forest Service there is thinking outside of the box on using authorities that they have tied to wildlife and others to help with restoration recovery of that area. So the short answer is hopefully you're doing it on all natural resource projects because you know, they should be landscape based and not ownership based, generally speaking, because nobody honors a property line except for a human being. So you know, you gotta make sure those partnerships are in play, and I think they are for the most part around the state. There's probably certain instances where people have been burned by, you know, agencies or individuals that maybe those bridges need rebuilt or healed. But yeah, I think it's already occurring in your area for that that fire. So
hey Mike, this is Clark McClung over in Sheridan, and I would like to add to I retired from the Forest Service, District Ranger. I think you're right on. If you don't start building those relationships right now, when the smoke's in the air, it's too late. Because things are so stressed that trying to build a working relationship. My hat's off to you guys for doing what you're doing, and it sounds like I mean that's the way things ought to be working. So and it takes a lot of time. So you know, you guys.
Yeah, it does. I mean, the you know, Fontenelle, I was still with state lands, so I wasn't wearing the hat I'm wearing today, but I was part of the conversation. And yeah, I mean, we didn't all get along in 2012, and there was some huge, you know, looking back, there was some huge relationship building with private landowners in that area, with game and fish, or even with the agencies, that there wasn't the trust, right? And now there's the trust, and that's built onto, now we're doing large, you know, we're doing a lot of infrastructure work through NRCS Farm Bill dollars on private lands. We're doing fence modifications with NGO dollars to help migrating wildlife. We're doing conservation plans to help them better run their private lands in conjunction with their federal. It's blossomed into this larger effort, you know, that we're now reaching out, which is what our mission is as a conservation district, as well as some of the other agencies, to a lot more people than, without the instance of any of these fires, we might not have been there for the next 20 years or whatever till a door opened. So
Yep. Well, you guys, my hat's off to you, because that's the way things need to work, and you're definitely seeing the dividends of those relationships. So that's a cool thing. The other thing, while I'm talking, I chair the Ag and Natural Resource Committee over in Sheridan, and we've got some other folks on here because we're struggling with where to head with some of we were doing some lunchtime conversations, and we just wanted to see kind of what you guys were up to, and try to see where we can head with this whole virtual thing. So thanks for letting us join.
No problem. Thanks, Clark.
Yeah, thanks for joining. Does anybody else have any other questions for Mike?
Well, I'm gonna get off easy.
Yeah, I guess so. All right, well, I guess if anybody has any, post-presentation questions, feel free to email them to myself or Mike, and we can always email, at a later time if you've got any questions that are burning after we all hop off. So thanks a lot for joining, and I encourage you all to jump on next month for our next one called Salts in Sublette County. So we'll see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.